Hi and welcome to PolyOriginals with Fiona Abel-Smith. So for today's project I thought we'd do a little bluebell brooch. Woods in the background and a couple of bluebell stems in front. It's a fun one to do this one, quite an easy technique, and you can take it as far or do as little as you want to do. The equipment we need for today's session is fairly standard. We'll start with our polymer clay blade. I sometimes refer to these as tissue blades. A craft knife. Some form of blunt-ended needle, knitting needle, cable needle, which this is, the short ones, just something so we can use it as a tool to manipulate. A polymer clay roller, a cocktail stick. If you're going to do a brooch back like me, then obviously you need a brooch finding. This is one of the ones with the safety ones, which just pops out. You can find them in loads of places online. Something to work on. This is baking sheet, but baking paper, baking sheet, tracing paper, wax paper, greaseproof paper, anything like that, and just a piece that's big enough for whatever you're planning your design to be. A little bit of liquid clay will be useful when we put the backing piece on. If you haven't got any liquid clay, and this is just some I've decanted into a little pot here, then PVA glue will work just as well for what we're going to do today. If you're going to create a template for yourself, there's various ways of doing it. You can use cutters if you've got a cutter. I wanted a sort of eggy oval shape, so I started by using PC UK Tools shape number 6, and I'll put a link to that in the details below. However, it wasn't quite big enough for what I wanted, so I used that as a template and just scaled it up to give myself a bigger piece. And I did that by actually drawing around it with a pencil, half the shape, and then just enlarging it with a pencil with folded paper, cutting it out, so I now have both the outer shape and the inner shape. So if you want to do the same, you'd need paper, pencil and scissors. If you've got a cutter, then just use that instead. If you wanted to work on some form of measuring sheet, I use this graph paper, which is freely downloadable from www.printablepaper.net. It's the 4 squares to 1 inch one, and I've simply laminated it. You don't really need it for what we're doing today. I'll just use it at one point just to show you the size of something. Other than that, I'll be working mainly on my tile or on that little piece of baking parchment, and on that a tile to work with, wet wipes and tissues to wipe your hands or tools as you go along, and of course a pasta machine dedicated to polymer clay use. If you're planning to cover the back of your piece, then a piece of just plain white card to put on the tile to stop any bits getting shiny is handy, and also just some form of texture sheet. This is simply a little bit of sponge, sort of the packing type thing you get, and just gives a nice texture on the back of your piece. When I bake my piece, I always wrap it, content it completely in aluminium foil, so you need a piece of that, and obviously a tile to bake on and an oven to bake in. I think that's all the equipment we need, so let's start with the project we're doing today. For today's session I'm using Fimo Soft Polymer Clay, but all known brands of polymer clay will work well for this technique. So the amounts I'm using are quite small. You can obviously make more, or you can actually use lesser amounts, and if you've got little bits of leftover colours from other things you've worked on, use those rather than using fresh colours. But if you are starting from scratch and want to know the colours and the amounts we're using, I'm actually going to be splitting these up into groups, and I'll come on to that in just a minute, but just to give you the basics. So for the whites, we've got about 2/3 of an ounce or 20 grams. This is Sahara, we've got 1/8 of an ounce, about 3.5 grams. The caramel, we've only got 1/4 of that amount, so a tiny bit, only about sort of like 1 gram type of it. The aqua, we've got 1/8 of an ounce, about 3.5 grams. The apple green, we've got 2 of these pieces plus another little half, so we've got effectively 1/4 of an ounce plus a 1/16 of an ounce, or about 9 grams. For the brilliant blue, we've actually got less than 1/4 of an ounce, just less, so that's around 7 grams. The lilac, we've got a 1/16 of an ounce, and the same with this plum here, so about 1/16 of an ounce or 2 grams for those two. The black is about 1/3 of an ounce or 10 grams, and the scrap clay we've got slightly more than those, so it's about 1/2 an ounce or about 14 grams. So putting the scrap clay to one side and the black, because they stay as they are, these are split down into small amounts like this. If you get these split out now, then I will show you in a second how I've put them together to create all that we're going to do for today. So there we go. So they're split in to those areas, And I'll show you next how I put them together to create the colour scheme for our project. So here are all the clays split up, and this is how we're going to use them. So the scrap clay will go first because that'll be on the back. Then we're going to do our background scene with a bit of the aqua, 2 parts of the white and 1 of the apple green. The trees are going to be our Sahara and our little bit of caramel. Then we're going to do the background foliage, mainly with the green, and then the background bluebells with a mixture of the lilac and the blue. And then when we do the stems, we're going to do a little bit of the apple with the white, a little bit of the blue and the purple, or the plum rather, and the white. And then for the bluebells, we're going to do that little bit of the plum with the blue, 1 piece of white, going down into a skinny blend of 2 pieces of white, and then the surround will simply be the black. You can either condition all of the colours now in their groups here as they are going to be done in, or we can do it as we go along, but they will all be conditioned thoroughly before I start to use them. If you are unsure about conditioning polymer clay, I have a video with a few tips and techniques, and I'll put a link to that in the details below this one. So let's get started, and we'll start off with the scrap clay. So I've got the sheet of baking parchment. I've put my scrap clay through on setting number 3 to give me a background piece, and then with my template I'm going to make sure that that's big enough to fit the template piece on afterwards. So what we need to do first is to start with the background blend. So I mixed up a light green using the 2 parts of white to 1 part of the apple green. We've got a little piece of aqua to go in the middle, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to chop down there and put the blue in between the green. So we want to create like a little line of light or sky behind green over the tops of the trees and then the bottom of the forest. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to put that down like that, put that back through the pasta machine, and as we've got 2 layers of setting number 3 here, I'm going to put it back through on setting number 2. And once I put it through once, I will bring it back to you. So all I'm going to do now is I'm just going to skew it ever so slightly, so that I'm going to mix over where the blue and the green is. So rather than doing the diagonal cut that we normally do in the Skinner blend, I'm creating a diagonal just by putting it through, and I only want a little bit of blurring between the blue and the green here and the blue and the green here. So I'll keep that going until I've got that nicely created with the blend going through with just a little bit of a mix where it goes between those 2 colours. Having got the blend done, I need to see whether it's roughly the right size, and actually that's not too bad. If your piece was too long and much longer than you wanted, then when you put it back through next time, fold it up and just push it slightly smaller. So I can still do that a fraction, and then effectively almost like concertinaing it, making sure you're doing the same at the top and the bottom, and then when you put it through, fold first, you would end up with a piece exactly the right size for what you want. If anyone's unsure how to complete a Skinner blend or would like a few tips and techniques, I do have a video showing you Skinner blends, and I'll put a link to that in the description below this video. So I'm going to put this one back through because I didn't need to change the length much. Put it back through once more on setting number 2, and then put it back through on setting number 4 because I only need a very thin sheet to go over this background clay. So just lay that on top. You're going to put it so that the horizon line is nice and straight, and then make sure it's going to fit with the shape we want. And I'm just going to take off the excess, so I give myself a rough idea of which part we're going to put our design on, so that when I cut round this template later, I haven't put most of the design on a place that we're not going to use. Take a fraction more off. To make the tree trunks, we're going to use these 2 clays. Now it's easier to condition a small bit either in your fingers just to get it nice and smooth and working, or on a thin setting on the pasta machine. And this one we'll put through on setting number 3. So I'm just going to condition this one in my fingers, this one on setting number 3, and I'll bring you back when I've just done that. Now I'm going to mix these colours together, but I don't need to do it particularly evenly because I want a nice marbled look. So I'm just literally pulling them apart in my fingers, just so that when I put it through the pasta machine, again on setting number 3 to start with, I'll end up with a nice marbled look. As normal, just fold it in half and put it back through until you end up with a look that you're happy with. So something a bit like that, where you've got just variation in colours, and it's quite a thick setting at the moment, setting number 3. We don't need it anywhere near that thick, so I'm going to put it through on setting number 7, and I want a piece that's going to stretch the whole length of my piece. So I'm just trying to think. I'll probably put it through that way so it stretches longer on setting number 7. Having done that, I'm just going to cut very thin stripes and just lay them in a higgledy-piggledy fashion across my background. They'll go fairly straight, but they will sort of cross over each other at times, and some go slight that angle, some that angle. If you wanted to as well, if you wanted to change the shape of this, make sure that any bottoms of any of the trunks were thicker than the top bits, but just straight lines will work very well for what we're doing today. They only need to be thin. So you can vary the size of them. And just lay them down, say not quite straight from one end of your piece to the other. When you're happy with all of those, just take your roller and press them into the background. Don't worry if they move slightly, it gives them a slightly more realistic look. Because the background we're creating is just a very basic abstract background. So that'll do for now. So the next thing we're going to do is we need to put a bit of foliage at the top and foliage at the bottom. So what you can do for this, if you've got our single piece of green, so we're going to get this conditioned. If you want to, you can then add a bit of the lighter colour in again, the same way as we did with these two colours, and just get a bit more marbling going on as well. So I'm just going to take probably about half as much as is in the colour I want, and say just add a bit in just to marble it slightly. You're not going to get a lot of variation, just a little bit. So once you're happy and you stop, put it down onto a thinner setting. So I'm going for setting number 5 on my machine. And place your clay fairly firmly down on top of your tile. Now this next bit, in order to create the leaves and the bottom of the foliage underneath the trees, we're going to use just a method of taking random pieces from this clay. Now like me, hopefully you've got some raggedy edges here, and all you're going to do is with the end of your cable needle or some other tool, just pull off bits. Make them completely random shapes. And just stick them on the bottom of the trees as if they were foliage. And continue doing that until you're happy. When you've done the top, give it a roll, put it all in, and then we'll add some foliage to the bottom in exactly the same way, but don't give it a roll just yet, because we're going to add some faraway bluebells in the bottom next. So once you've added enough foliage on the bottom to leave gaps for the bluebells, get the two colours that we're going to put together to make the far off distant bluebells and mix this into one brand new colour. And again, we're going to mix it together through the pass machine and then put it through on the same settings as setting number 5 as we did for our green colour. As with the green, I left it very slightly marbled so you can see some of the different colours. It's not really going to show up much in the finished bit, but it just adds a little something. And what I'm going to do with these, I'm going to add them in the gaps to give the impression of far off clumps of bluebells. Now these are going to want to go fairly horizontal lines rather than vertical, so make them as if you're seeing them in between, sort of like rows of them in the background, in between all the foliage. And I will sort of take off a very few bits and just put small bits right at the top. Okay, so the clumps will get smaller as they go further away, and they'll be bigger as they're close up. And what I'm going to do finally is I'm just going to flick around with the end of my needle just to sort of mix these up slightly even more. I'm going to check with my template to make sure I'm happy with how that's looking. I'll decide which way up I'm going to go, probably that way up. And when I'm happy with that, you can either leave it textured or give it a bit of a roll. And I'm going to give it a bit of a push down with my finger. I don't actually want any fingerprints on this, but I want to push it down enough to give it so it's not standing too proud, but still leave a bit of texture on it. So that's the background done. Now, of course, if you wanted to, you could just do a lot more detail in this and make this into a little bluebell wood description by itself. So we could have much more marbling and different colours in the background. The trees could be shaded. You could do a nice little skinner blend from light on one side to dark on the other, and you could add a lot more detail in this foreground bit as well. But for what we're doing today, we're actually going to do the big bluebells in front. So what I do need to do now is I'm just going to put my piece of paper on there, pop my template back inside, because I want to give myself a rough marking, make it slightly more upright, a very rough marking of the outer area to make sure that I don't do too much of my design inside an area that I'm no longer going to use. But I'm not cutting it off in case I decide to change my mind, because I can always go back and flatten or add extra bits in. Right, so now I've got more of an area of where I think I'm going to go. So these bits can all be cleared away, and let's make the stems for our bluebells. So to make the stem, we're going to put the blue, purple and white together in one colour, and then the green and white together in another, and then we're going to do a little skinner blend between those two. So I'll get those colours sorted, and then I'll bring you back and show you the skinner blend, but I will probably do it fast forward because you don't need to see all the details. I'm going to get you all the way through till we've got our nice blend going. So there's our nice blend. I've put it through in quite a thick setting of the pasta machine, so setting number 2 on mine. And when I had it in the pasta machine, I made sure I kept pushing it up against one side so that I kept my piece so it wasn't going to go too long. Because what I'm going to do now is I'll cut off the end to give myself a nice neat start. I'm just going to take 2 small pieces. There's much more here than you need for the one project we're doing, so obviously you can use this for more than that. But for the 2 pieces I've chopped off, we've now got square pieces, so all I'm going to do is very gently give them a roll. And I'm going to taper the purple end and just roll the rest so it's no longer a square piece, and then they will sit, when I get it done, on my work. If it's too wide, you can just make it thinner. And get both of them ready before we make the petal cane. To do the petal cane, as before, we're going to take our white and our mixture was this one, with a little bit of purple, the blue and the white, and then our 2 pieces of the white. Once you're happy with the state that your blend is in, we're just going to chop it in 2. Put it back through the pasta machine, darkest end first, on the same setting to give ourselves a longer strip. And then put it through on your thinnest usable setting, dark end first, to give you as thin a strip as you can possibly get. Having done that, we're just simply going to concertina the piece together by folding it backwards and forwards. And I'm not going to do it very wide, so that's probably about 1 centimetre, sort of less than ½ an inch wide. Having done that, I'm just going to pull it slightly longer, neaten it up just slightly, because we want to create that dark stripe in the middle of our bluebell petals. So just take your piece, cut it in half, and if you just put that together, then you're going to create the middle bit being darker than the outer. And then just with your fingers, all I'm doing is I'm just pushing the lighter colour clay just slightly around the outside, just to colour over the darker clay slightly. Now we want these petals quite small, so we're going to reduce down, and we're going to do that by doing what I'm doing here, which is just pressing your fingers in to create a little diamond shape, pressing as you go down, and then flattening it out to create it and make it longer. When you get to about that size, I'd probably cut it in half because you don't need the whole thing. So we now know, we can see what we're looking at, and we're going to get it down to a size where it's going to fit nice and neatly onto our piece. So probably want about 3/4 centimetre, so probably about 1/4 inch, something like that, and just keep going, pressing down, and again flattening out, because what we're looking for is quite a long, thin petal shape. So if I put it there on the measuring sheet, you can see roughly the size it is. So it's not just under 1/2 inch, probably about 1/3 inch, probably. And then just chop through the end, check what you've got. And we actually want it slightly narrower than that, so you can press down even more. We also want one end quite pointed, so I'm just pressing in more on that side and creating a blunter bit at the top. And then we can start putting our pieces together. So I'm going to start with the back upper curl first. So I'm going to take my piece towards the top, working inside my restrictions there, because I know I'm going to have one piece on the end here. And let's take him out here and curve him down along there. And then that will leave room in a minute to put my other piece going there. So having done that, I'm going to cut 5 slices. Now I want these quite thin, so go as thin as you possibly can. What you'll find as well is that when you press down with your blade, these will start to flatten on the underneath. That's fine. Don't worry about that at all, because we will be reshaping the petals as we go. So nice and thin, and takes 5 slices. So the first 2 slices are actually the underneath of the petals, what we see from the back. So these are just going to pop down as they are, straight, leaving a little bit of a V in between them. Now the next 2 are the ones that are going to go down the outside, and these are going to want a little bit of a flip on them. So the blunt end is here, and that's going to bend slightly inwards, and then this bottom end we're just going to flip ever so slightly out, and that then sits over the top of the back ones and flipping out towards the side. So on this one we're going to do this other side, so that's effectively a reverse. So the blunt end bends over slightly and the bottom flipping out. And then our last piece is the piece that goes down in front of them, so it goes down towards the middle. So we're just going to taper that slightly, and that sits on top. So that's our first bluebell done. Then you need to decide where you want to do them. So we'll probably have another one coming down here and one coming down here. We'll just do those 3 to start with, then we'll put our next piece on, because that piece is going to be coming around here. We'll probably add 3 on him and then another one just in the middle, because it's nice to have uneven or odd amounts. So 7s, 5s, 7, 9, something like that. You can just run that slightly back if you want to, till it joins into the stem. So I will fast forward, carry on doing those, and get it all through until we've got the whole piece done with the bluebells on there. Once you've got all your pieces on, if you find anywhere like this where you should have had a little stem or something come down, just take a little offcut from your stem cane and just pop a little piece in so that has somewhere to hang from. Have a look, make sure that you're happy with where everything is placed. Sit your template over the top, check that you're happy with how it looks, and if you are, I'm just going to carefully, with a cocktail stick, just inscribe around the outside that I can go back in and cut neatly by hand, rather than try and push through the paper at this stage. So where those stems are, I'm just going to press down to make sure that when I cut down through, they don't move. And then go back in and cut away your template. When you're happy with your piece, just peel away the baking sheet and place it on a tile, ready to bake. Tent the whole piece in a bit of aluminium foil and bake according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay you are using. And I'll bring you back when that's done so we can finish it off. When our piece is finished in the oven and is cooled, I have put the backing clay, so that 1/3 of an ounce, through setting number 3, so medium setting on my pasta machine, and done it in such a way so that it's big enough to go around the edge of our brooch. All I'm going to do, take the cocktail stick and very gently just mark around where that piece is going to fit, so that I then have a marker so I can take the brooch back and I know exactly where that's going to go. So I'm going to place it equidistant for the outline, and I can now cut that so it's nice and level, so the brooch is going to sit level. Pop out that piece of black, take a little bit off because when we're going to put it back in we don't need the bits on either end, and now we can take a little bit of liquid clay and put it on the back and round the edges of our piece. If your piece was uneven, you could have sanded the edges at this point, and of course you don't need to put this backing on at all. If you're happy with it just as it is, you could always, if you wanted to, just super glue a brooch backing on and leave it exactly as it is. But if you want to put a surround, and I just like to have a little bit of a surround going on, then this is what I want to do. So I've put a bit of the liquid clay on there. It's enough for it to be tacky, not slippy, so that I can then watch where my outline was that I've done and put it back on. Clean your hands. So I should now be able to peel that off the backing sheet quite easily. I can stick my brooch back in where that's going to go, and that piece should fit back nice and neatly inside, and then with the cable needle I can simply push that piece of clay in and around. Push the clay under where all the mechanism bit sits, so it's nice and neat. Same on the other side. And I always push down just slightly to get the indent where the spring bit sits, so that you're not putting extra pressure on that once it is baked. I will leave the spring open whilst we bake it, but the next thing we want to do is to pull up and around, so that the black clay goes completely around the outside. And then either with your polymer clay blade or with a craft knife, you just cut off the excess. Now it's going to be slightly more difficult obviously where we've got all the bits around the bottom here, because we've got slightly uneven surface, but you should be able to still get around relatively neatly. And you don't have to do it all in one. You can do it in a couple of different goes. Basically take that all off, and I will now go back, as I say, take the excess off, neaten it up where it's sitting in grooves. So the next thing to decide is if you want to do any texture on the back of this. If you did, just get your texture sheet and just put a nice sort of texture on the back. A little sponge or something is a good one to use. Just something like this, and that'll take away any imperfections you've got on the back and give you a nice textured finish. I will then bake that face down on a piece of card, so there's a piece of card between the tile and the polymer clay so that the bottoms of these don't go shiny if they're touching the tile, and bake it as before, completely tented in aluminium foil and baking according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay you are using. And I'll bring you back when that's all finished. So there's our finished piece, nicely cooled and out of the oven, and with the brooch back in place. Obviously you can do it for lots of other things, necklaces, pendants, card toppers, fridge magnets, anything you fancy. I hope you enjoyed that Bluebell tutorial. Thank you so much for watching, and a special thank you to those of you who subscribe. I really do appreciate it. That's it for now. Hope to see you next time. Bye.